In this chapter, we're going to take a look at the cognitive development as it occurs in the first 2 years. Just want to give you a brief reminder. Remember, for every topic, for every phase of development, we're going to look at it from the bio, psycho, and social perspectives. So this is the psycho perspective, or short for psychology. So in this video, we'll be concerned with cognitive development within the first 2 years. So an important thing to understand is what's called sensory motor intelligence that starts to develop during this time. And this researcher here, developmental researcher named PSY, he's very important. You're going to probably hear his name often throughout this course. But that was his term for the way infants think by using their senses and their motor skills. So hence the term sensory motor. That's senses and motor. Okay. And then on taking that a little further, so Piaget, he posited that infants, they're active learners, and adaptation is the core of intelligence. So adapting to their environments and to everything. And then cognition develops in 4 distinct periods. Now, I'm not going to expect you to memorize those 4 periods. I just wanted to make you aware of them. So sensory motor intelligence, that's when infants, they adapt their reflexes through information from their repeated responses. So it's they develop sensory motor intelligence through repeated responses to information, okay, from their environment and their reaction and their interaction with the environment. Now, an important thing, is sensory motor intelligence is goal direct behavior. So that's purposeful action, that benefit from new motor skills resulting from the brain maturing. Okay. And there's this term right here I did put in here because this is an important concept to think about and to understand. It's called object permanence. And that is the realization, that objects or people, they continue to exist even when they are no longer in sight. Because, before object permanence kicks in, babies, as soon as someone or something is no longer in sight, they think that it no longer exists. But object permanence, when that finally starts to develop as a result of the maturing of the brain, they start developing what's called object permanence. Now, I just want to remind you here, in this phase right here too, is, researchers say that, that brain development right now, psychological development, it is compared to information processing theory. And remember, that was modeled on computer functioning. They analogize it with computers. Okay, and then I put this on here because I want you to be aware of one term here, and that's called affordances. And so an affordance, that's an opportunity for perception and interaction that is offered by a person, place, or object in the environment. So I just wanted you to be aware of that, and that may, show up later on throughout our course. Okay, so in regard to the psychological development at this age, at this phase of development, we're going to take a look at memory. And so, just want to let you know, that infant memory is fragile, but it can be activated with reminders, repetition, and retrieval cues. And so just want to make you aware of that it can be improved at that age, but usually these 3 things, either being reminded or repetition or retrieval cues, if those are used, then that can actually help facilitate the baby's memory a little better. Now, so I just want to make you aware, this is not necessary for memorization, but it says, in early developmental theory, they thought that, infants, they don't really store any memories in their first year. Now, that is really not true, but that was, just in the early years of that, Freud, when he talked about childhood amnesia and everything, that's where this type of thought process became known at that time. Now, here's the thing, though, is developmentalists, really agree now, that the young infants can remember, they actually can form new memories if these following conditions are met. So the conditions are similar to real life. If their motivation is high, if the baby is very interested and maybe really driven, that they can develop memory better. And then of course, as I mentioned earlier, special measures, they aid memory retrieval, things like memory cues and things like that. So as a final reminder for all of our memory here, so remember, reminders, repetition, and age, they have something to do with memory development. And you feel free to pause the video and look at this to gain further insight into this. Moving on. Okay, now we're going to take a look at, language development. What's going on, at this age? And so they make a reference here to what is called babbling. And that's repetition of certain syllables, such as ba, 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 which begins, when babies are between 6 and 9 months old. So they don't really begin to start sounding like their native language, until they're around a year old or so. But before that, they're actually developing, their brain is developing and developing this cataloging sounds through babbling. Now, gesturing, all infants gesture, and so those are expressed way before speech develops, and that's just something to keep in mind. And pointing, usually emerges in human babies around 10 months or so. Okay, so then when the first words actually start, when the child is able to elicit first words, usually at about a year old, they can speak a few words. They may be, just in it, isolated, maybe a single word or something like that. But they actually start recognizing patterns and things like that. But once, the vocabulary reaches about 50 words or so, then it basically explodes. It just builds really quickly. Like they say, roughly 50 to 100 words per month or so. So it's just something of very to be interested about and to become aware of. Now, cultural differences too, they may, have a difference, have an effect on speech development and stuff. And I put some, examples on here and everything. This example right here about, even music tempo. Tempo means maybe like speed, how quick the beat is going and stuff, but that is culture specific. And so right here, you can see that this young child is actually playing the bongos, and you notice he's got really, good technique, good hand position and everything. And then grandfather here, is actually teaching him how to do that. So this is, something that is more culture specific. Okay, so we're going to take a look at various theories of language learning. So theory one, number one, infants, they need to be taught. They don't just learn to speak, just randomly, and it just eventually happens. They need to be taught. So, their parents need to teach them, and other caregivers. Frequent repetition of words is really important. And then last but not least, what's really important on here. So if adults want their children who speak and understand and later read well, they want that to happen, they must talk to their infants. because infants, they develop a vocabulary and, of sounds and syntax and grammar and stuff. And so the more adults speak to their children, the more they will help this occur. Okay, so theory 2 of language learning, so social impulses also help to foster infant language. So, because we are all humans, are social beings. And so the emotional messages, speech, not just the words, are the focus of early communication. So that is the social impulse, the emotion that goes along with the word as well. And once again, culture does definitely have an effect on these processes. So theory 3 of language learning, infants teach themselves. Well, so they say language learning is innate, and adults need not to teach it, nor is it a byproduct of social interaction. Now, this was a theory and everything, but I put it in here because I would like to know, basically, like for you to think about that. And do you feel that that is true? And that might be something worth, discussing in our discussion forums or something to the, something like that. So I just put that in there for you to be aware of and understand, the history of the theories of language learning. And so that concludes our discussion. And, please, once again, as a reminder, please get your study guides out and begin to answer its questions while this information is fresh in your mind. And that way you can begin to practice it through repetition and to get it into your long-term memory. So thank you, and we'll see you on the next chapter.